Hey sis, each month inside Entrusted Women University, we feature a brand new interview. You can watch the full interview only in Entrusted Women University, but you can check out this snippet right now.
The book is Ethnic Loneliness, and it covers all ethnic and racial groups. But the reason that it was written the way it was deliberate. And the reason is because I'm an Asian American woman, and so but I can't speak for all Asian American women, right?
Right.
And I can't speak for the experience of all Black women or Latino women. But there are parts of our experiences that are similar, and we can share and talk about them. The ways that we are marginalized and the ways that we are othered. And so that's why I put all of that in there, particularly like that.
Mm. You guys, Presanta has written a brand spanking new book, Presanta Verma Beyond Ethnic Loneliness. So, and let me read the tagline: the pain of marginalization and the path to belonging. So, we're going to get into all the things I know that many of you will say I identify because we're talking to women writers and speakers of color. So, you know what it feels like to be marginalized. Just in case you are new to Presanta, I want to make sure and read her bio before we get started. She is born under an Asian sun, raised in the Appalachian foothills in the South. That's quite a combo, uh, and which is probably the premise for your book. And now living in the Upper Midwest. Presanta is a writer, a poet, an editor, a former debate coach, public health professional, and a mom of three fabulous kids. So that's a whole lot. Presanta writes about culture, identity, belonging, loneliness, and what it feels like to be an outsider. She is passionate about making the way for diverse voices and believes stories are one of the best ways for us to connect with each other. She considers herself a lifelong learner. When she's not writing, she's reading, walking, and exploring the beauty of the natural world. I love that. I've recently started really admiring the nature because it's quite fascinating, actually.
Yeah, and you learn so much from nature and the process of nature and the seasons of nature.
Mhm.
So many lessons we can take from nature, besides
Yeah.
being beautiful.
Yeah, it's stunning, really stunning. I had a chance to, I was in the Los Angeles area on a mountaintop, and the vegetation there was just like nothing I've ever seen before. Then I just got back from Arizona, and so it's nothing but desert, but it's still stunning. Like it's still
Yeah.
stunning. No grass. It is just absolutely beautiful, just rocks and red clay. But anyways, but to the subject matter of what we're going to be talking about, you see God's diversity right there. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
whether you're in
Yeah.
Colorado or you're in
Mhm.
California or you're in Arizona or you're in the Midwest or you're, on the East Coast, you can see God's diversity in the vegetation and in the trees and the plants. So God is a lover of diversity, and
Mhm.
this is going to be a great conversation that we're getting ready to have to talk about ethnic loneliness. But first, before we get started, this is your first book.
Mhm.
So how did that happen for you? How did you
Mhm.
stumble upon publishing?
Mhm. That's a good question. And I'm actually getting this question a lot from people that I know, friends, and so it's something that was intentional.
Yeah.
I am a writer, and I have been writing for many, many years. I was a freelance writer for many years, and there was a point when I said, I'm going to be very intentional about my writing. Before that, I was a closet writer. I was writing, but I wasn't publicly sharing my writing. And so at some point, I became intentional, and that was well over 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And I started putting my work out publicly. I started learning about writing and publishing because I just loved it. I loved writing. And sometimes as a writer, you have this burden, you have this calling upon you to write and share something. So I had that also propelling me. And I started putting my writing out there and started pursuing um, writing groups and writing conferences so that I could learn. That's one of the ways that I learn is by researching and learning a lot. And because I didn't know the first thing about publishing.
Yeah.
So I just started learning and going and meeting other people who knew what they were doing and who knew about writing and publishing. Um, but that's eventually what led to the book was I was putting articles and had a few published, and then I started pursuing it even more intentionally.
I love that because I've found that there's so many different pathways to publishing. You can't say there's a cookie cutter, path to follow. Like if you're trying to follow somebody's path, and your path is going to look completely different. So I hope that that was helpful to some of you all that are listening to our story. So then to have your debut book, this one packs a punch. You came out the gates hitting. Why did you decide to write this book about ethnic loneliness?
hmm
That's a heavy hitter.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Kia, because if I hadn't been putting my work out there for the past 15 years and getting used to what that felt like and understanding, here's what it feels, and I was dipping my toes into topics like this and I was writing about this topic. If I hadn't been doing that, I don't know that I could have written this as a debut book because I had already been writing about this. So it
Mhm.
was a topic that I started to get used to, okay, this is how people are going to respond, or how do I want to go about writing about topics like these. So those years were important. They were good learning for me. And
Yeah.
if I hadn't done that, I don't know that if I don't know if I could have done this
Hmm.
to write a book about this topic.
Yeah, I think I had it pulled up and I might have put it down, but let me see. Oh, there it is. Yes. I had a quote that I wanted to read from your press kit because I was like, ooh. Oh,
Oh, I want to
okay,
hear
let
that
me read
quote.
it. Okay, here it is. I don't know if this is pulled from your book or not, but it was very intense. Okay, people of color have consistently been marginalized in a white centric society. We have felt invisible and lonely. We have been devalued, attacked, beaten, shot, lynched, enslaved, exiled, killed. Asians have been marginalized and made invisible. Black people have been devalued, enslaved, and murdered. Indigenous people have been erased and oppressed. Latin Americans have been discriminated against and publicly marginalized. This is by no means an exhaustive list of affected groups, and these adjectives are incomplete and inadequate to describe all the trauma, pain, and centuries of oppression. But with increasing loneliness, alienation, disconnection, and polarization, not only the United States, but also globally, finding a sense of belonging is an urgent task for the person of color today. Ooh.
Whoa. Yes, that does come from my book.
I was like, Lord Jesus. So yeah, I mean, you meant no words. And I actually everything you said is accurate. Um, I think when you are a person of color, you probably spend so much of your time muting um reality and
Mm,
muting the truth, and especially now, oh my gosh, in 2024, where increasingly we are told that our history either did not exist, was not as painful, shouldn't impact you today in terms of how you matriculate through society and get a job and go to college and do all these things. There is no trauma. What trauma?
mm,
Especially today. So I personally do appreciate the boldness,
mm,
um, the audacity of your book, in really speaking truth in that way.
mhm,
Why do you think it's important to name ethnic loneliness, especially when some people may look from the outside in and say that doesn't exist, that's not
mm,
real, we're all
mhm,
one?
mhm. Well, ethnic loneliness is I guess let me start by defining it,
Yeah,
and
let's do
maybe we'll start with that. So ethnic loneliness is when we feel disconnected or culturally isolated as a result of our racial or ethnic identity.
that. Yeah.
So whenever that it happens, it's important to name that experience. And if we don't name it, why is important? Why is it important to talk about it? If we don't name it, then how can we address it? How can we heal from it? What do we do with it? And naming that reality, I think, is important for understanding and recognizing, seeing the person in front of you. When you name it, you're saying, I see you, and I acknowledge that part of your experience. So that's why it's important to name and talk about ethnic loneliness. And
Mm-hmm.
and that quote that you read just a minute ago, that quote, and I just wanted to give a little background about that. The book is Ethnic Loneliness, and it covers all ethnic and racial groups. But the reason that it was written the way it was deliberate. And the reason is because I'm an Asian American woman, and so but I can't speak for all Asian American women, right?
Right.
And I can't speak for the experience of all Black women or Latino women, but there are parts of our experiences that are similar, and we can share and talk about them. The ways that we are marginalized and the ways that we are othered. And so that's why I put all of that in there, particularly like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's difficult, even with a group like mine, Christian Women Communicators of Color. We're top heavy Black women because I'm a Black woman. You're going to attract who you are. But I recognize that we have Korean and Chinese and East Indian and, Japanese and then biracial, Japanese and Black and Korean and
Mhm.
Black. We have a spectrum going on here, and by no means can I speak to all the experiences that we collectively have had in terms of the women in our group.
Mhm.
So I understand that quote, and I think that the other thing that I think is also important and why your book is important is because it's difficult to name and define something if you don't even know it exists.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, I had a conversation with Shantae Griffin. I don't know if you know her. She wrote the
Mhm.
book "Loving My Black Neighbor," loving your Black neighbor as yourself, and she was talking about growing up in a predominantly Black environment, predominantly Black school, predominantly Black this, blah, blah, blah. And I had a similar experience too. So I really didn't experience ethnic loneliness
Mhm.
until I became older and I found myself in spaces that were not majority Black. And then I was like, I'm feeling
Mm.
something
Mm.
that it doesn't feel great, but I don't know what it is. I don't know
Mm.
how to define it or call it anything. It wasn't until I started reading more books and,
Mhm.
and that's the same with trauma too.
Mhm.
You be traumatized really bad and not
Yeah.
knowing you get some therapy or you read some books or you talk to somebody and you're like, oh my gosh, that's not healthy. What? I've been doing that for 20 some odd years. Or I've been living like that.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
yes, I'm saying in naming it and defining it, sometimes you need somebody to just point it out and say this is what it
Mhm.
is, so that you can identify your own lived experiences. In your opinion, what does ethnic loneliness feel like? Ooh,
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think there's so many ways to answer that question, and there's a lot. We could talk a long time just about that question.
yeah,
What I could say is it feels like being a foreigner, being ethnically lonely. You feel like you don't belong. You feel like there's something that is preventing you from saying, I belong here and I'm welcome here. And that feeling of being a perpetual foreigner, there's uncertainty attached to it because you don't know if you're walking to a space like you just were sharing your experience of when you started feeling that as an adult and later on in life. And then when you're in those situations, you're walking into a space, you're not sure. There's this uncertainty of, well, am I going to belong here or not? Am I welcome here or not? And when we can't fully belong, when we can't fully be our whole selves, We live fragmented and disconnected and
Mm,
disjointed. So it feels like we're leaving parts of our whole self and true self behind too when we're walking into these spaces and we're not sure if we belong. So then we're doing this kind of mental gymnastics of how much of myself am I is welcome here. Um, so that's what it feels like. It feels fragmented. It feels like being a foreigner.
so so good. And I think as a mother with teenage sons, this summer my family, we were in a place where we were in the minority,
Mm,
and I found myself not just being concerned about myself as a black woman, but I
mm,
was hyper vigilant about my kids.
yeah.
I was
Mhm,
just like, where are you going? Don't go by yourself. Make sure you take your brother, all these things.
mm,
So as you talk about, being fragmented just within yourself, I felt like I split the fragments, split the
mhm,
fragments in half, because now I'm also like, very concerned about my kids. Will they be well
mhm,
received? Will they be perceived as a threat, or do I need to monitor them over and over? So 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 good. So many different feelings. And
mm,
I think that in and of itself is also traumatizing when
mhm.
you're unable to just be, or you're thinking about the previous situation that feels similar to this situation, and you're sweating or you're nervous and you're, all the things.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I noticed that you talk about different types of loneliness. I think we're headed there. What are
Mm.
some different types of loneliness that you can experience?
Well, there's all kinds of loneliness that we experience. And when we're talking about loneliness, I think one thing I want to mention is that our Surgeon General of the United States declared loneliness as a public health epidemic and a situation
Wow.
of great concern for our nation, our society. And it's actually not even just the United States, but other countries too. For example, Japan and the UK, they have ministers of loneliness because it's something that is affecting us at a societal level and it's affecting our health. The reason the Surgeon General talked about it is because feeling lonely can affect your health by as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And
Mm,
people don't recognize that loneliness and the aspects of loneliness have a direct impact on our physical and mental health and our social health. So we need to be talking about this holistic sense of our being. So loneliness is important. There's all kinds of loneliness, of course. We're talking specifically about ethnic loneliness, but people experience all kinds of loneliness. There's um, for example, people in all kinds of life. There's
yeah.
situational loneliness when, maybe you lose a loved one and you're going through, a time of loneliness because you're missing that person and they were maybe your go-to person. So we can talk about all kinds of loneliness and loneliness in different age groups and different demographics. Um, Elderly people, our young people, our teenagers, college students, young moms, moms with their home with their kids all day and they're isolated. All aspects of our society are affected by loneliness. And here is another layer that we need to contend with: ethnic loneliness.
Right, right. And as you're talking, I'm definitely thinking that ethnic loneliness can be exasperated by um by the season of life that we're experiencing.
Hmm.
Even I've been thinking deeply about this because my father is a Haitian immigrant. And so right now there's a lot of attention being placed on Haitian immigrants,
Yeah,
and
right.
the pain of that. And so
Mm,
that in and of itself,
mhm.
in terms of some of the, dare I say, persecution that they're experiencing because of their ethnicity, um, there's some loneliness there. because
Yeah.
everybody's not experiencing it. It's a
Mhm.
specific focus on a specific people group. And so
Mhm.
that is ethnic loneliness, and it's at a specific time in history. So I'm almost, and it is situational. It is
Mhm.
situational.
Mhm.
Um,
And politics definitely has an effect on that. Like you mentioned, what's happening with Haiti right now, and I don't know when this is going to air, but it's a current event happening, and we can go back to the pandemic when it started, and the president at the time was calling it the China virus, and so Chinese immigrants and people from Asia were being targeted and attacked. That is another example of something that happened.
yeah, I would.
Yeah.
That's actually what I thought about, because I was not. That wasn't my ethnic group, but I heard stories, and I think, you know, we're going to get into who the book is for, but I think when people of differing ethnic groups are willing to lean in and understand and be aware of the ethnic loneliness of others, it gives an opportunity for compassion
Mm.
and empathy, and really to be the body of Christ. You know,
Mhm.
that the Lord, we were admonished to weep with those that weep and rejoice with those that rejoice. Well, leaning into the ethnic loneliness of others is one way I think we could do that. I hope you enjoyed that interview snippet, and I want you to be sure and check out Entrusted Women University by visiting membership.entrustedwomen.com to see the interviews in their entirety. And join us next week for more content to help you on your writing and speaking journey.